What is greatness? Is it something available to everyone or only to a special few? How is it determined? By the impact of your actions or by the quality of your character? For some, greatness is an idol to be chased after, sacrificed for, even to die for. For others, greatness is something that they just don't really worry about. They see it as a hassle for those with higher ambitions. And nowadays, it's common for fans of different sports teams to debate who's the GOAT, the greatest of all time, within their particular sport. The thing is that arguments like this aren't unique to our 21st century bars and online fan pages. We've been asking questions like this for millennia. In fact, the Gospels recount a similar argument breaking out among the apostles. And an argument arose among the apostles as to which of them was the greatest. But Jesus, perceiving the thought of their hearts, he took a child and put him by his side, and said to them, "Whoever receives this child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me. For he who is least among you is the one who is great." There's a theme that runs throughout Luke's gospel called the Great Reversal. The passage we just read is a perfect example of it. Within Jesus' kingdom, true greatness is the opposite of what the world expected it to be. In Jesus' time, greatness came from armies, wealth, mighty deeds. It certainly didn't resemble an ordinary child plucked out of a crowd. Jesus reverses the apostles' expectations, stating that true greatness comes from being humble and servant-like. There's another detail about greatness within this story that's easy to overlook. The child's not the only example of greatness that Jesus gives. He says, "Whoever receives this child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me." So let's unpack that a bit. Whoever receives the child receives Jesus, right? But how is that? We know that Jesus has a special affinity for the poor, the humble, the downtrodden. But why? It's not just out of compassion, but it's because he deeply identifies himself with them. Consider Jesus' life. He's the eternal Son of the Father, enthroned in glory from all eternity. And yet he sets that aside and chooses to be born in a hovel outside Bethlehem, poor and subject to all the discomforts and threats that mortal life brings with it. He learned about grueling manual labor alongside St. Joseph in Jesus' day. We say that he was a carpenter, but that didn't just mean woodworking. It also meant stone and masonry. That was hard, demanding labor. For 3 years, he traveled as an itinerant preacher. Read, for 3 years, he was homeless. He knew the perils and hardships of wandering life. And don't even begin to think about the intense opposition that he faced. After delivering this lesson on greatness to the apostles, Luke tells us that Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem. What was going to happen in Jerusalem? He knew. He was going to be subjected to the most shameful, painful death that the ancient world had to offer. The reason Jesus loves the poor is because he was poor. He belongs to the poor, and the poor belong to him. He tells us, "Whoever receives this child receives me." Just like he says, "Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these brethren, you did it to me." Here's where it gets cool. By taking on a human nature and willingly accepting a poor life, Jesus didn't change, but poverty did. In becoming man, Jesus didn't set aside one bit of the greatness that was rightfully his as the Son of the Father, as a divine person. In fact, he actually takes that greatness and extends it to all those things that he assumed, humanity in general, and in this case, the poor and lowly in particular. This is really the origin of the Beatitudes. We hear, "Blessed are the poor." Why? Because Jesus blessed them. So a great reversal really has taken place in what it means to be great. Prior to Jesus, greatness was about enlarging oneself in the eyes of the world. But thanks to Jesus, we now see that it's really about enlarging oneself in the eyes of God. And who are the largest in God's eyes? The least, the poor and lowly. This brings us to the virtue at the heart of this session, which is magnanimity. Webster's defines magnanimity as a loftiness of spirit, enabling one to bear trouble calmly, to disdain meanness and pettiness, and to display a noble generosity. I think this definition sounds nice, but I actually don't find it all that helpful in terms of practicality. Remember, virtue is something that we develop and practice along our journey towards holiness. So, how do we actually develop a lofty spirit? To answer that question, I'm actually going to have to teach you a little bit of Latin, but don't worry, it's not very much. Our English word magnanimity is a conjunction of two Latin words, magna and anima. Magna means great, and anima means soul. Put them together, and we see that magnanimity means having a great soul. And I hope this starts to connect the dots for us as Catholics. No offense to Webster's, but I think having a great soul involves much more than just disdaining meanness and pettiness, or being noble and generous. Apart from God, these things could actually drive us towards an unearned sense of superiority. Think about our earlier discussion about greatness. Christian greatness comes from humility, from being poor in spirit. It's a complete reversal of the world's ideas of greatness. And within the context of this current series, I can't think of any better example of great-souled people than the saints. Throughout these episodes, we've compared the saints to a mosaic. Each forms his or her own unique tile within a greater image. That image is holiness. One of the most inspiring things we can do as Catholics is to read about the lives of the saints. Doing so has a strange tendency to create new saints. St. Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, didn't always live a saintly life. When he was a young man, he dreamed of military glory, and he was totally obsessed with chasing after it and imitating these knightly tales of chivalry that he just sort of absorbed through the culture around him. There's a point where he was grievously wounded in a battle and confined to bed for months while he recovered. And during that convalescence, he was given a book which contained biographies of the saints. We often call these lives of the saints. As he read them, he found that his soul began to desire something different. Rather than worldly greatness, he began to desire to do those great things for God. And once he healed, that's what he set about doing. He embarked on a lifelong journey of sainthood. That'd be way too much for me to talk about in this video. What we see is that there's something magnetic and compelling about the saints. The saints differ from one another in so many ways. Some are rich, some are poor, some are well-known, some are relatively obscure. But what they all have in common is that they possessed great souls. They were magnanimous. We make ourselves great by doing what the saints did, by striving after holiness. Rather than disdaining meanness and pettiness in others, we have to learn to disdain whatever sinful qualities we find within ourselves. Rather than viewing ourselves and our efforts as noble or great, we have to learn to recognize that what's truly great within us is God's grace, His own divine life that He shares with us freely. This honest self-reflection doesn't have to involve self-condemnation. There is greatness within each of us, and in fact, failing to admit that isn't humility. It's actually a vice. It's a little-known vice called pusillanimity. If magnanimity means being great-souled, pusillanimity, taken from the Latin word for small, means being small-souled. And if we deny the gifts and graces God has bestowed on us, if we reject the things that truly make us great, we shrink ourselves, we shrink our souls. When we turn away from God and in on ourselves, we shrink the world that our soul operates within. We go from God's immensity to our own limited perspective, and our soul has to shrink to accommodate it. However, when we move outside ourselves towards God and towards others, that also has a name. It's called charity, otherwise known as love. Our souls grow or shrink in proportion to our love. And recall St. Paul's timeless advice about recognizing and living a life of love. Love is patient. Love is kind. It is not jealous. Love is not pompous. It is not inflated. It is not rude. It does not seek its own interests. It is not quick-tempered. It does not brood over injury. It does not rejoice over wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. For many, family is the great school of love. And I think this makes a lot of sense. Getting married and having children often has a remarkable effect on our ability to love. It convicts us of those little petty selfishnesses that we cling to, and it gives us opportunities to move past them. Because love isn't a zero-sum game. The more we pour ourselves out, the more we give ourselves away, the more we find that we have, the greater our souls become. Before I move into the next portion of this video, I encourage those of you watching to pause and to consider this question. What experiences have truly grown your soul and taught you how to love? So in these videos, we always stop to consider several saints who lived out the virtue that we're examining, in this case, the virtue of magnanimity. The first saint that I want to draw our attention to is a saint that many people don't know, and I really think that they should. That saint is Saint Elizabeth of Hungary. She lived a relatively short life from 1207 to 1231 AD. So she died at only 24 years old. And she was married at 14 and widowed at 20. By all accounts, she had a reasonably happy marriage. Her husband was a nobleman within Hungary, and kind of the lord of a landed area, but he died while he was away on the Crusades. And after his death, in her grief and her attempt to process it, Elizabeth became sort of obsessed with generosity towards the poor, and she gave away most of her late husband's estate. In response to this, his family accused her of squandering the wealth that he had had. And for a time, she was sort of stripped of all of her titles, all of her dignities, and basically lived as a homeless person, one with the poor that she loved so much. Eventually, she was rescued by her son, her husband's heir, who restored her property to her. And in, I think, just an incredible example, she went right back to the charity that she was so known for, building a hospital and caring for the sick until she herself died of illness at the age of 24. In Elizabeth's life, we see what it means to be great, and we see that our understanding of greatness, the world's understanding of greatness, is different than God's, is different than the image that Jesus gives us. Her husband's family thought that she was doing something terrible, that she was giving away the things that made her great, lands and money and titles. But in reality, she was making herself a saint. She was making herself great in the eyes of God. And history remembers her for it. She's the patron saint of Third Order Franciscans, of lay men and women who try to live their lives according to that Franciscan spirit of poverty, chastity, and obedience. So in a short life, a life that you would think barely had time to become great, she was able to live in a way that's echoed through the centuries. And if we want to talk about great saints and saints that show us that reversed idea of greatness, there's no better saint than Jesus' own mother, Mary of Nazareth. We all have a special love for Mom, right? And Mary is 100% worthy of all that love and more. And she shows us what magnanimity is really all about. There's this prayer that comes to us from Mary. So remember, the angel appears to Mary, tells her that she's going to conceive and bear a son who will be the Son of God. What does Mary do next? She goes in haste to Elizabeth, because Elizabeth is also with child. We call this the visitation, right? When Mary greets Elizabeth, Elizabeth's child leaps in her womb. John the Baptist leaps for joy in her womb. And Elizabeth declares how blessed she is that the mother of her Lord has come to see her, to visit her. What does Mary do? She doesn't take that glory that Elizabeth is giving, and she doesn't keep it for herself. She returns it to the Lord. She says in a lot of translations, "My soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord." But other translations read, "My soul magnifies the Lord." And in fact, we call this prayer, as a result, the Magnificat. She says, "My soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God my Savior. For he has cast down the mighty from the thrones and has lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he has sent away empty." Look what Mary's telling us. God views greatness very differently than our world does. The mighty, the wealthy, those that the world looks on and lavishes honors upon, those aren't the ones who are great. The poor are, the hungry are, the lowly are. The Virgin of Nazareth, who is nothing in the eyes of the world, is now the Queen of the universe, enthroned in glory beside her Son in heaven. This is what happens when we embrace this virtue of magnanimity, when we accept this new reversed definition of what it means to be great, and when we respond to God's love with all the love that we have on our own. In all this talk about the saints and how they're models of these different virtues and models of holiness, it's actually tempting for us to view them as just that, as models, people who are distant, somehow separated from us. But as Catholics, we believe in what we call the communion of the saints. We believe that because the saints are with God in heaven, and because we're united to God by grace, that we're also in this community with the saints. We really can have personal relationships with them. I first came across this idea when I was in seminary and I was learning about St. John Vianney, the patron saint of priests. He had this special friendship with St. Philomena. He would pray to her all the time for different things. We often, we know to go to saints who are the patron saint of one thing or another. Like, how many of us have ever prayed to St. Anthony when we lose something because he's the patron saint of lost things? But what we don't want to lose sight of is that the saints aren't limited in the help that they can give us. It's not like because St. Anthony is the patron saint of lost things that's all that he can do, right? That would be to put a limitation on the saints that shouldn't be there. We really want to try to develop a friendship with the saints. And that's easier said than done. What I found in my life is that the saints, they kind of form a friendship with us. We don't always choose the saints that are going to be the most meaningful in our lives. And as an example of this, I'll tell you the story of how I came to, I think, have an incredible friendship with Saint Dymphna. She was a 7th century saint in Ireland. She died as a martyr, and she's now the patron saint of those who suffer from mental illness. Both my wife and I have an incredible devotion to her and pray to her often for a variety of different reasons, and we've seen some real miracles in our lives through her intercession. We attribute our marriage to her, believe it or not. The fact that we ever even met each other, that we fell in love. So I was a seminarian, I think as many of you know, for several years, but during that time I did struggle with some mental illness myself, and at the end of my time in seminary was asked to leave to get myself right, to get right with myself and with my emotions and with God, and it was definitely necessary. That was a really difficult time in my life, and during it, I had a lot of people who were praying for me, which was great because I was a time where I was really having a hard time praying myself. I actually met my wife through my sister. Her and my sister were friends in college, and my sister came home from class one day and seemed visibly upset, and the different roommates kind of got together and asked her what was wrong. And she mentioned that her brother, had left seminary and that I was really struggling with my mental health. And she was just really feeling it for me and just wanted to help however she could. And her roommates decided that they were going to pray a novena to the patron saint of mental illness. They looked that up and it was St. Dymphna. So they found this novena, 9 consecutive days of prayer for a particular intention, and they offered it to St. Dymphna on my behalf. Now, this was completely unknown to me. I didn't know that they were doing this. also unknown to me was that after that novena ended, for whatever reason, Tiffany, my wife, felt motivated to continue praying for me. And for the next year, she continued praying for me by name. And remember, like at this point, I didn't really know her. We had met once or twice in passing when I dropped my sister off at school. But something within her, I think St. Infinite's intercession was a big part of this, told her to keep praying for me. So fast forward a year, we're at my sister's wedding. Both of us are in the bridal party. And me and my wife really hit it off, and we're having a great time. I ask her out. We go on a couple of dates, and we start dating. We enter into a relationship. And shortly thereafter, she it was Valentine's Day, and she wrote in my Valentine's Day card the story that I just told you, that she had prayed this novena for me, but that something within her had told her to keep praying for me for this entire intervening year. And I just remember so clearly thinking, that's something that I think my wife would do. And I had this just incredible sense from the Lord that this was the person that I was called to marry. That intervening year between leaving seminary and meeting Tiffany was the hardest year of my life. I was profoundly struggling with a lot of different things, and I didn't have the strength during that time to really pray for myself. But through the communion of saints, through this incredible church that we belong to, God was able to bring prayer and grace into my life through the woman that I was one day meant to marry. This is what it means to be part of the great mosaic, which is the church. It's a mosaic made up of us here on earth. We all have our own tile in it. But we also have this great communion of saints in heaven who are not just giving us examples, but interceding for us night and day, for us to follow in their footsteps, for us to develop these great virtuous souls and to reach the heights of holiness ourselves, so that one day we can join them as saints in heaven and we can return the favor for the next generation of saints in the making here on earth.
So we've been talking about magnanimity, our greatness of soul, throughout this video. And one of my absolute favorite saints throughout my life has been Saint Benedict. And what I love about Saint Benedict is you can summarize essentially his entire spirituality in 3 words. It's kind of the Benedictine motto, and it still is today. The Latin phrase is ora et labora, which simply translated into English is prayer and work. And that's what Benedict knew was going to be like his path to holiness, was going to be prayer first, right? Not work and prayer, it's ora et labora. So prayer first, leading to work, and then letting his work then funnel him back into prayer, and just kind of being this daily cycle of prayer leading to work, leading back to prayer, back to work, and so on, which is how he founded all of his monasteries. The monks that he would train would follow that exact same formula, and kind of saw their call to holiness as well. And what I've loved about that is its simplicity, right? Is that you always start in prayer, and allowing the Lord in that moment of prayer to speak to you, to give you the gifts and the strength that you need in order to accomplish the work that he has for you. And so Benedict has been very close to my heart for several years, and I just love that spirituality. It speaks very, very much to me. And the reason I think that this all relates to magnanimity, right, or greatness of soul, is that magnanimity is not opposed to humility. In fact, magnanimity and humility are meant to go together, and that phrase of ora et labora is so simple and so humble, and yet Benedict used that to found some of the greatest monasteries in the world that are still operating today. And I use that in my own daily life to ask the Lord to give me what I need to be a good pastor, to be a good priest, to be a good father, to be a good Christian man. And so allowing the simplicity or the humility of that spirituality to push me into greatness is what I've always loved about Benedict, and that's why he speaks to me and why I've taken him as a patron for all these years.
So, as we wrap up this series on holiness, on the saints, on virtue, what I invite all of you to think about is, where do you fit in this mosaic of holiness, which is the church? What does your tile look like? What part do you play in the greater picture? And I hope that one day somebody else will be talking about the saints, and your names will be the ones that are inspiring others to holiness as well.